I'm Dr. Shawn Tassone. Welcome to Confessions of a Male Gynecologist, a podcast dedicated to women's health and hormones, and pretty much everything else you were never listened to when you went to the doctor's office. I'm board certified in OBGYN and integrative medicine, and I have a PhD in mind-body medicine. I guess you could say I'm a little bit outside of the box. In this podcast, I'm going to get you the answers you've probably asked 5 other doctors and were kind of blown off. I want you to know that I'm not only here to talk, I'm here to listen as well. And now, let's get to those confessions. Hey everybody, welcome to another amazing talk where we're going to talk about something near and dear to my heart and probably everybody out there is participating in, and that's supplements. And not just supplements, but supplement quality. And we're going to hear today from James Frame, who's the CEO of Symphony Health, and Deanna Minich, Dr. Deanna Minich, who is the Chief Science Officer. And what I wanted to do first is kind of have them tell you who they are and what their expertise is in. So start with James.
Ladies first.
Ladies first.
Aww. Well, I have a PhD in medical science. I have studied nutrition. After I finished my training, I went into work in the food industry, and I was there for about 3 years. I've also worked in the beverage industry. And then from there, I went to work in dietary supplements. So in total, I probably have worked with dietary supplement companies for about 14 to 15 years. So I have been a product formulator. I pretty much started at the level of product formulation. Then I began working in the clinic using products and then began educating. So what I hope to divulge today is talking a little bit about the myths and talking about the things that most people don't know because they haven't been an insider in that industry.
So I'm James Frame. I've been in the natural products industry for about 25 years. And what's sort of unique and what I'm excited about with this conversation is that my experience is supply chain from seed to shelf. And so during that period of time, I've been involved in raw materials and manufacturing and packaging and all of those things. So this is sort of like a really exciting sort of conversation. I know it's a passion of yours. You know, what can consumers do to be able to differentiate and be able to know what is a good supplement and what isn't a good supplement, and what can they trust and what can't they trust, and sort of trying to get some insider information. I've seen some podcasts on this recently, and a lot of people are sort of towing the party line and want to be careful of not stepping on toes. And I get told I step on toes all the time. So
You're a truth teller, that's for sure. That's a good thing.
So yeah, I'm excited to have this conversation with you.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that I do in my spare time, which tells you how boring I am, is I will go on Instagram and I get inundated with advertisements constantly from supplement companies. And I've never actually seen Feminescence come up, but which probably is a good thing. But they make all these crazy claims. We'll fix this, we'll fix that. And they kind of, they have the wording, so they're not quite saying cure or whatever. But you see all these things. And as a provider, I had to take a course from a friend of mine on how to read a label on a supplement. Regulated, not regulated. They make these claims online. How and where? Where does somebody even start? What does it mean to be regulated? How do people know what's good and what's not good?
Well, there are many different kinds of claims that can go on a dietary supplement. You have what's called structure function claims. These are very big and broad and kind of generic, similar to something like may help support heart health, right? Or supports bone health, but you don't name a disease condition. Then there are the more heavy hitting type of claims, which are disease claims, which may help with lowering cholesterol, which could be related to heart disease. So then there's some discussion about disease. So the FDA, FTC has much more vigilance and oversight over those disease claims. And I think that the Wild West sometimes happens on the side of the structure function, where there's a little bit more of a slippery slope of people making claims based on, science that could be out there. And, what we know that, I'm not a regulatory person, but I have worked with regulatory personnel. And one of the things I know is that for a dietary supplement, you need a dossier of studies to support the claims that you're making on the package. The amount that you have in there should coincide with the studies. So many times what happens, as we know, is that people use borrowed science. So they'll go and look up the scientific studies, and then they'll track something like, let's just say turmeric as an example, and say, okay, these studies used 1 gram of turmeric. So let's put 1 gram of turmeric in our product, and we'll talk about inflammation. We'll talk about all of those various aspects. So I would say that the highest bar when it comes to a claim or to a product is to actually have clinical efficacy on that specific product, where that product at that dose was tested in the intended population for a certain duration, and then making those appropriate claims.
And James, as far as the manufacturing side of things goes, when you're regulated, or when you have, maybe you can talk about this, the labels that you put on products, are there certain things you have to meet? Like, are you inspected? Do people come into your factory and watch you do things? Do you test the product to see if what's in it is actually in it? How do people know that your company is actually doing the things they need to do?
Yeah, good question. And I think one of the things that I want to sort of start with is what is regulated and not regulated, because that's the thing that I find so interesting. Is you have so many media groups that sort of talk about how the natural products industry isn't regulated, and then you have industry groups from the natural products industry. So yes, we're regulated. So are we regulated? Are we not regulated? And the reality is that we're regulated for certain things, but we're not regulated for other things. And so to start off with, how is it actually regulated? And to your point, it's regulated around manufacturing. So it's regulated around, how can you manufacture a product? And so you do manufacture a product and you test for microbiology, you test for heavy metals. So there's all of these regulations, they call them GMP, or good manufacturing practices. And so it's related to how it's manufactured and how you have to follow particular processes and protocols so that products are manufactured in a safe and healthy way. And so that part of the industry is regulated. And to what Deanna just spoke about, same with the labels. So what is in a label? So if you claim that there is 100 milligrams of vitamin C, is there 100 milligrams of vitamin C? So those things are regulated. You need to be able to substantiate and verify that. What isn't regulated in the United States, but is regulated in other parts of the world, is the amount of product and the exact ingredient that you have in that product mirrored to clinical trials. So using the turmeric as an example, you might have, in Australia, obviously where I'm from, and in Germany and other parts of the world, you can only put a product on the market, on the shelf, if you can verify that the exact ingredient and the exact dose that is in that product mirrors a clinical trial. And so if using turmeric, you would have to use the exact ingredient that was done in the clinical trial and in the exact dose and stability and all of those factors to be able to make any statement in Australia or Germany or other parts of the world. In the US, if you're a good company, like the high end of the scale is that they might say, oh, we've got an ingredient with the same level of active ingredients of this turmeric, and we're using the same amount in this study, so ours is the same as the study. And yet, it's the argument between, pharmaceuticals with generics versus non-generic. Why is it that non-generics seem to always work better than generics? Right. Same sort of thing. And so, but in the US, it can be even worse, where you can have, a smaller amount of turmeric, and it might be not even an extract or something that has high concentration of active ingredients, and you can make the same statement as somebody who might be selling the highest quality turmeric on the planet. And so that's a distinct difference, is that it's manufactured in a completely regulated way. So when you're looking at stability and safety, and you're looking at microbiology and all of those things. But when it comes to efficacy, that's where there's a lot of smoke and mirrors. One of the biggest phrases that you hear in the US now is clinically proven. Oh, this is clinical.
Yes.
It just doesn't mean anything anymore.
Sounds good though.
Sounds good.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
But it's like natural. What's natural mean?
FDA reviewed or FDA, like it's not FDA approved. There's a step prior to that they'll use.
An FDA approved facility.
Yeah.
And so they're implying that the facility is approved and thus the product is approved. But in actual fact, the FDA's come in and said, are you manufacturing correctly?
Yeah.
I haven't checked that individual product to see if it has a clinical trial connected to that exact ingredient. So that, that's the...
Though, there are many outlets these days, even retail stores, that are demanding and wanting. They have regulatory departments, and they are being much more scrupulous about what goes in. And so
James was mentioning that just earlier about Amazon requires you guys to tell them exactly what's in the product.
Yeah, I mean, if you're a consumer, like, what can you do? Like, who do you go to? And one of the ways that you can have a check and balance is, where is that product sold? So if you have a product that's sold at I know you use FullScript, which is a health distributor of products. So if it's sold on FullScript, there's a tick. If it's sold in Whole Foods, they've checked, they've done some vetting of that product. There's a tick. And Amazon, what I was talking about to you before, just to share with people, is, Amazon used to be the Wild West. Like, anybody could sell anything on Amazon. Now, Amazon is probably the highest level in the United States of vetting, where they actually, you have to each year send in certificates of analysis verifying label claims and statements and all of these things. So now, if you see a product sold on Amazon by the manufacturer, because sometimes people can get around some of those things, although again, Amazon's stopping all of that. It's doing an amazing job. They're probably protecting their Whole Foods business, but like, if you've got a product that's sold in Whole Foods, that's sold on Amazon, that's sold through FullScript, that's sold through, through all of these different sort of distributing platforms, that all of those platforms have curated and have vetted those products. And so you have a lot more security in knowing that those products have been checked by different people for different reasons versus, and you and I have had this conversation, some product manufactured by some doctor that the only way you can buy it is from their website. Like, it's sort of like, who's vetted that one? The person who's selling it. Okay, maybe you have the most trustworthy, awesome doctor, and they obviously exist. But are all of them? And who's that been manufactured by? None of those doctors manufacture those products. They're all manufactured by a third party. And let me assure you, as somebody who manufactures things, every trick of the trade to get a product out your door as cost effectively as possible when you have to. And you can pull the wool over any person's eyes if you want to. I've been in enough lawsuits where we've caught manufacturers pulling the wool over our eyes or trying to, that we ended up getting rid of them and became fully vertically integrated. So we control every single process because we just couldn't, we found certain manufacturers that we just couldn't trust. And so, we decided we had to do it ourselves.
So Deanna, I call myself a supplement purist. If I'm going to use maca, I just want maca. I don't want 9 other things. If I'm going to use melatonin, I just want melatonin. What's the difference between using something like a product like Herbatonin that's just melatonin versus these proprietary formulas that have lemon balm, valerian, melatonin, hops, and like 7 things in there? Do you find that being a purist is better than being like these, just throwing the kitchen sink at it to see if it works?
You're right. That's called mixology, right? Where you put a bunch of actives together. I like
drinks.
Know.
Drinks are good. Mixing one up. No.
The kitchen sink, everything but the kitchen sink is the idea there. So Yeah, I mean, I think we need to be careful because some of those things in a tablet or capsule might have interactions, right? They may be more
Right.
hygroscopic or more water holding, so they might have more degradation. So from a stability aspect, there's some consideration to be made there. So what is the longevity? How does that affect shelf life? Then on a separate track would be the efficacy. So how does putting all of those things together? And one of the things that we think about even with detoxification pathways is that sometimes we rev up certain of those detoxification pathways through plants. Are you changing the metabolism of one of the actives that you have in that composite because you put something in there that will increase its metabolism? But most people don't realize
Right.
that there's complexity upon complexity. So I think from safety, quality, stability, and then efficacy, you can all have issues there. And I think that, I mean, you spoke like a true clinician. Usually clinicians, and this has been my experience working in the dietary supplement industry in the healthcare practitioner channel, is that clinicians want targeted actives. They don't want to mess with a bunch of different, it's kind of like potpourri or pixie dust as it's referred to, right? They want therapeutic amounts. They're using that for the intended cause of some kind of a change in a symptom. So it's easier for them to layer in rather than to try to patch it all together. And, in some cases, what I also talk about with nutrients is that, and I see this with vitamin B6, right? B6 is in everything. It's in mood formulas, neurotransmitter formulas, energy formulas. Well, there's a tolerable upper level of B6. So if people don't add up and start looking at the complexity, then there's a problem. The final thing I'll say is absorption. Let's just take melatonin. Melatonin, well, we could take anything, but melatonin is kind of unique because it's amphiphilic. It likes fat, it likes water. There are certain other things that just like water, and they need water to be absorbed. There are certain other things like vitamin D that just needs fat. So if you have a targeted active, then you're not clouding the picture and you can take it appropriately with the right substance or food, like even omega-3s. You need food for that, right? Not to take it on an empty stomach, but then you see other omega-3s that have things in there with the hopes that all of those things will be absorbed. So I think there are many layers to look at that in terms of a complex supplement versus a single agent.
I had a patient come in the other day who she thought she had a hormonal issue because she was anxious, irritable. She was only like 28. And so I just drew a lab panel on her, and her hormones are actually really good and in a good range. Her vitamin D was almost twice the normal limit, like dangerously high. And I looked at all of her supplements. She was taking 50,000 units a day because of all the stuff she was taking. And on top of that, a vitamin D supplement. That once I detoxified her and got her off all the vitamin D, she just felt like a normal person again.
Wow.
And so you can, by taking these kind of blends of everything, if you're not watching what's in them and adding them up, you could actually overdose, especially on D, A, K, and E vitamins, because those are fat soluble and they'll get into dangerous levels in your bloodstream. So
that's right. I mean, if you just look at the advancements in our industry, it's to personalization. And the personalization now has it where, there's some companies out there where you can have an exact vitamin and mineral formulation designed specifically to what you need based on your lab deficiencies. And to your point, you might not need one thing, you might not need anything, and others you might need a much higher level. So that personalization, and that's one of the reasons that we were obviously a purist company where we've never combined things, because if you're a practitioner, the practitioner is going to decide what is the combination that this individual patient that they're dealing with needs. And if, as to your point, if we all of a sudden include vitamin D or something like that, then they have to stop and go, oh, wait a sec, I'm getting this from this and this from this, versus my patient needs this amount at this particular time. And, it's fat soluble or water soluble, depending on what the compound is. So, it's the more we go to personalization, it's going to be, individual. And, many people don't even do studies on all of these combinations.
Right.
So how do you know if do you know if it's synergistic, or do you know if something is when you were saying that story, I was waiting for you to hear that they had some, herb in there that was spiking that up and making them anxious because they were taking too much of it
too. It's possible. Yeah. I mean, so you mentioned this earlier. I want to go through some of these terms real quick because I don't even know what some of them mean or don't mean. Like GMP. What does that mean? What sense of security do they get when it says GMP on it?
So if it says GMP, good manufacturing practices, it means that you know that they are, hopefully, manufacturing those products correctly. So they are doing, they're looking at cleanliness and safety and quality control. They're testing for microbiology. They're testing when ingredients come in to make sure that what they're putting in there is what you've asked them to put into that product.
When you say organic for maca, what does that mean that your growers are doing?
So hopefully what that means is that you have certificates of analysis showing that the grower is organically certified, that the person manufacturing the powder or the proprietary ingredient is organically certified, and then the manufacturer or packager, the people who are packaging, are organically certified. So you're wanting to make sure that each group along the supply chain are all organically certified. It's the same with kosher and halal, or these sort of certifications. You need to make sure that everything along the pathway is organically or kosher or halal certified. But instead,
the organic claim is political in many instances. They're cutting corners and coming up with all kinds of things.
But what they had done is they had been able to get kosher certification for the distribution facility that they had. And so they were claiming that the salt was kosher certified. The other thing is, and this is semantics, I guess, but by definition, salt is kosher. Do you know what I mean?
Right.
So, again, it's sort of it's a funny one with same as there's that big thing with at the moment for non-GMO, that sticker, to the point that some people are asked for it. I see that yours is organically certified, but you don't have a non-GMO. But if it's organically certified, then it's non-GMO. So this supersedes that certification. But those certifications aren't educated enough within our industry for people to understand and discern, what means what.
Well, I just would like to add into that, because there are certain things that are just known to be true in the industry and certifications in the classical sense. And then there are things that are coming up, I would say trickling up from consumer interest. And one of them, you said Himalayan crystal salt. And I wanted just to share with Shawn, one of the things that we recently tested was microplastics. Because we know microplastics are everywhere. They're endocrine disruptors. And, maybe it's not a certification and it's not required, but it's something that people will want to know about. So we did test the Himalayan crystal salt just to be sure that it didn't have microplastic contamination, and it had nothing. And we share that C of A, we share that specification with people who read the blog on Himalayan crystal salt.
And the reason I agreed to pay for that was that I got shown a study on various sources of Himalayan crystal salt that showed that some of the sources had microplastics. And I said, how can a salt that was formed 250 million years ago, that's been mined from somewhere, have microplastics? But what happens is that people will get a pink salt from another part of the world and claim it as Himalayan crystal salt, and then from that pink salt from the river that they've sourced it from or somewhere else has had microplastics. And so thus there is microplastics in Himalayan crystal salt. But in actual fact, if you get the true sources, you're not going to get that. But you have to do these things to give that information and provide them to consumers, so consumers can sort of just add those layers of trust from the sources that they're getting, to make sure that they're actually getting true Himalayan crystal salt or turmeric or whatever the herb is or product is.
The other one that's not required is FODMAPs. So for people who are following a low FODMAPs diet.
Explain.
Oh, yeah. So FODMAPs. So having low sources of saccharides of all types, fructose, oligosaccharides, disaccharides, monosaccharides, sugar alcohols and polyols, right? So there seems to be a connection there with bowel issues. And so some people are very hypervigilant about avoiding these FODMAPs, this class of FODMAPs. So one of the questions that we have had come in through just our medical team and just questions is, well, does your feminescence is it consistent with low FODMAPs? Can I take that and not have any kind of issue? So again, that's not required as part of the dietary supplement industry, but meeting people where they're at. So we actually did test our products and found that they are consistent with a low FODMAPs approach. So, there are some value add that are type of measurements and analytes that are separate from what is the standard course connected to certifications.
And just on that point, and it's not necessarily exactly FODMAPs, but there are, when you look at the European Union, one of the things to be aware of is that the EU has so many more regulations for manufacturing and quality control with supplements connected to pesticides and compounds that might cause inflammation or histamine responses. The EU now has so many regulations that, again, if a consumer sees that their product is sold in the EU, that's another layer of vetting that they can be sort of assured that there's a significant amount of quality control. So that's sort of another thing. You look at Whole Foods and Amazon and Fullscripts and those things. But if a company is selling their product in the EU, or their product originally comes from the EU, that's another thing where a consumer can go, oh, cool. And that's a big thing in the personal care market as well. So when you're looking at cosmetics and you're looking at shampoos and moisturizers, the EU's standards for those are very, very high. And I know that there's a number of companies, even in the United States, that promote the fact that they have EU standards in the personal care space. And that's sort of like it's a very big tick for heavy metals and
even
quality
food.
control. Food.
You hear people talking about how when they go to Europe, they have no issue with bread, but then they come to the United States and it's like, oh, wait a minute, there's something off here. Is it the pesticide residues or is it the gluten? What is it? So there is something about the EU, in terms of that high bar.
So let's say we're out to dinner and I've got a couple of bottles and I'm like, Deanna, I got this stuff called Dr. Shawn's Menopause Fixer with 2 X's and an R, so I'm not actually saying fixer. But I've also got Feminescence. These doctors that are making their own formulas, what's the big difference here? Like, why wouldn't I want to try this one over that one?
Well, you have to get closer to the source, closer to the point of origination. So as James mentioned, having a company that's vertically integrated where you can have checks and balances at every step of the way, and that it tracks with the seed to the source to the final product. And I think that when you start to move that away from the source, away from that point of origin, then there can be a lot of other things that enter into that process. As James had mentioned, different contract manufacturers taking shortcuts. I mean, you just can't account for that leap between a product that is directly coming from a company that is vertically integrated versus one that is not. And then you have to look at all of the other things, like what is the actual constituent that is being featured? Is it, again, in therapeutic levels? I love this one mantra that we use in the dietary supplement industry. The most expensive dietary supplement is the one that doesn't work. Mm-hmm. So does it work? Supplements can be expensive. And people, in my clinical experience, when I was in the clinic, people would bring in shopping bags of supplements.
Still do.
And they don't even know what, they just pop it and, well, why do you take that? Why did you get that brand? Let's just kind of go through each one and look at levels. So
I'll tell you why they get it. It's marketing. It's totally marketing.
It's good. All those ads that you see on social media that you talk to.
I think that also, for me, it's just one thing. Do they actually have published clinical research? Like that's when you have
but the ingredients in the products, they'll say clinically researched. So the 3 ingredients or the 6 ingredients all have been researched, but not together per se, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
But at the same time, yes. So Yes.
So it's a
do
little
they
semantic.
Yeah,
salad.
do they have published clinical research on that exact
Right.
combination formulation? But also at the same time, what are those actual results? And that's the thing that's, I think, really hard for consumers is, I mean, I know lots of doctors who find it hard enough to wade through a published, clinical trial to sort of decipher it and go, what does this actually mean? And that's the thing I think is when I look at those sort of formulations or I look at those particular products, I also look at what is the ingredients that they have chosen and what do those ingredients actually do, and what has the results been. One of the things that we most recently did is we did a paper for a doctor event that's coming up, and we actually put together all of the published clinical trials on black cohosh, red clover, soy, wild yam, like everything, and said, here's the best results that have ever been published on these products. And what is the success rate? What did it impact? And we compared it to what Feminescence does and some of the other products that are on the market, so that doctors, and we've created a consumer version, which we'll do, can look at it and go, oh, okay, so if I'm taking this product, it impacts hot flushes and night sweats, but there's no clinical evidence for it to impact cardiovascular disease or bone density or vaginal dryness or libido. Oh, but then this one impacts this. And so, that's one of those things when if I was comparing two products, like what does it actually have clinical evidence to say that it does? Even if we move away from the fact that it won't have published clinical research on that exact formulation, even then, what do all these ingredients do? And that's one of the things I think that's most interesting, is that when you address that mode of action is a big factor, I think, with supplements. When you're addressing the root cause of an issue, you have all of this cascade of benefits, where often those kitchen sink supplements are all about a Band-Aid here, a Band-Aid here, a Band-Aid here, or giving them enough things for about 5 different aspects and hoping that one of those things that they've given is going to have an impact on their health enough for them to go, oh, this supplement works.
So a question, you go to the store, Whole Foods, and there's Feminescence. Right next to Feminescence, not yet, but let's just say there's another product, same kind of box, maybe the similar colors, a little purple, and it has similar ingredients to your product. Maybe not Macagio per se, because I think you've got that trademarked. But let's say it's something similar. We see this with like Paul Stamets, who's the Mushroom King, and there'll be a product right next to his exact same formulation. I mean, I'm going to go with Stamets because I know who he is, because I know he's got a quality product. But people are going to buy this other product probably because it's a little cheaper. It might even be that store's name brand. They do that a lot. They'll take a product. What is the difference in those products, really? If it's the same formulation, what's the real difference?
That's a really complicated answer. I mean, to your point, Paul Stamets is a great example, because I recently saw a new product line launched by a very credible herbal company. And herbs and mushrooms are different things. Okay. And I don't care how much experience you have in herbs, doesn't mean you have any experience in mushrooms. And so when I'm seeing these sort of formulations, and I'm seeing it by the top herbal company and then Paul Stamets, who knows more about mushrooms than pretty much every person on the planet, I'm going to pick his product every single time, even if it's more expensive. But, to your point, that's a really hard one, because how do consumers differentiate clinical research and ingredients? And, there's lots of ways that we can do, because we understand supply chain and those things. But I think an easy way to do it is, and Paul Stamets is a great example, is all you need to know is that Paul Stamets has more patents on mushrooms and knows more about mushrooms than everyone on the planet. And you go, I trust him. He's not going to put something with his name and know all about this to then put a product that doesn't work. It just defies logic, especially when you're thinking about longevity and right. You want someone on those products for the rest of their lives. So for me, one of the things I think that consumers should do is have a look at who are the doctors who use and recommend this product that aren't on their medical board who aren't connected to the company. So because if you've got a doctor who is just using that product because they've seen such great results in their clinical practice, it doesn't matter how much a company might come in and say, hey, we'll pay you this to try this product. To try it, absolutely. Pay me and I'll try your product. But if it doesn't work,
Right.
why would I risk the health of my patients, the long-term trust of my patients by giving a product that doesn't work? So I think that factor of, very rarely do you see, I'm not going to bring that up because I don't want to get into arguments, but having a third-party doctor, I think is a key factor of who are using this with their patients and are talking about it and aren't paid endorsements, but simply a doctor who has used it with their patients and seen great results.
Right. And Deanna, this leads me to the next question. I mean, all these ads I see, clinically proven, clinically researched. How is it that they can get away with that when they haven't actually done research on their product?
Well, there are a lot of these products out there, so it's hard to keep track of them in terms of like having them spot checked by the FDA, FTC. But an educated consumer would know that you can actually go to those sites. You can look at the FTC. You can start to look at warning letters. You can see who's been called in for violation of various claims and such. So I think, sometimes it's been so difficult to manage and navigate that realm because it's almost like you have to be educated on several fronts. So that's why I agree with James about going to the healthcare practitioner side of things and saying, what does my healthcare practitioner recommend? What have they used? What have they had reliable results from? And, I get the question all the time about what supplements to take. And I always pivot to saying, go through and first line of working with your healthcare practitioner to figure out what you actually need and go from there.
I think it's, you get what you pay for. I know it's an old adage, but it's like, and Feminescence isn't even particularly expensive in my opinion compared to some other supplements out there. But it's like, I always tell people, like, say with fish oil, usually in a gelatinized capsule and you can't smell it, crack it open and put it on your tongue. What is it? If it tastes rancid, it's probably been sitting on the shelf for months and months and months. And you want to use a product that's already, that's good for you. And I think in this realm of maca and whatnot, I would imagine you've probably done the most research of anybody, and you can go on your website, and I did it last night, and look at the actual papers that you've published. And here's a question for you, Deanna. There's so many open journals nowadays that are just like, you could publish anything. How do people know? Okay, well, we published it, but was it it had 12 participants. I say this all the time to patients. I'm like, somebody will say, there was a claim the other day. I was looking at something that had their product. Oh, it was Tongat Ali. And it was like, it raises testosterone levels. And I said, well, where's the paper? They sent me to the paper. It had 8 people in it. Okay, well, that's not a study. That's a case study, but that's not an actual study. What do people look for when they're looking at, let's say they're nerdy folks like maybe me and you, and they want to know a little bit more? What makes a study a good study?
Yeah. Well, first and foremost, the highest bar is placebo-controlled clinical trial, prospective study in a population with those symptoms, right? And it's interesting because many claims and health claims, they require that you're looking in a healthy population. But in actuality, where you want to see an effect is in a population that would require and need that. So the highest bar would be having a placebo that's matched to the intervention. So that's what, if you look at the clinical work that we publish with the Feminescence products, so we have 4 published clinical trials. And what I especially like about that, and I give credit to, I wasn't involved, so I'm not taking any credit for that, but I give credit to Dr. Meissner and James on this, is that there were very interesting sequences used with these women. So they might be placed on, as part of baseline, then they would go in and start taking placebo, but they didn't know. And then they would be swapped over to taking feminescence, but they didn't know that they were being changed. So we're accounting for almost like a double placebo. Like, so they don't know that they're being switched and there are various sequences. And then after being on maca for some time, then they go back to placebo. So seeing for, 8 months or 4 months or however long the trajectory was, to see, do those values of hormones go back up after they've been transitioned from placebo to maca and then back to placebo. Feminescence specifically. Yeah, thanks. Because that's what was actually tested. So I think
so study design is important.
Study design,
Critical.
prospective, not an association, but an actual study that was mapped out to answer a set research question rather than going retrospectively and saying, okay, these people ate eggs. Did they have increased heart attack risk? Or, that's that's the weakest type of study, right? Now, I don't discount case studies, so even a study,
somewhere.
Yeah, it counts for something. And in this age of what we've been talking about is personalization and how important it is to personalize supplements, I think those N of 1 case studies are also important because sometimes they can inform a clinician and give them an insight or an idea of how they might be able to use the product in a similar patient cohort that they have. So I do think that there's value in the N of 1. Also in the smaller studies, if you can look at the specifics and how tight the baseline range is, there are some qualifying questions there. But numbers do count, and having the population in which that product is intended. So that's what I like about feminescence is, again, it's been studied in perimenopausal and also in early postmenopausal women in these different sequences that tell us a little bit about what happens when they go from placebo to feminescence to placebo. Is there a change? And you can clearly see it where hormones go up and there are other changes that happen after they make that shift.
It's really fascinating if you go online, and something I've been really interested in the last few months has been organ meats, like heart and stuff. And there's a lot of companies that do that. And one of the companies out there right now is doing this thing where they're reading patient testimonials, which is freaking genius because they're only going to read the good ones. So that's a case study.
Yeah,
and it's a good case study. But what it's funny is they're like, well, if this patient had a great experience, you will too. And I always just kick back like, well, what about the 1-star review you got who said it didn't work? Well, that's where a study comes in because it may not work for everybody, but it worked for a majority of people. And the other one I like is when they say, well, I took the pill and my energy, I was more laser focused. Well, yeah, because you knew you were taking a pill. So of course you're going to feel it. It's that placebo double-blinded controlled study. So, James,
can I say,
yeah, of course.
My favorite star review was we had a 3-star review, and it was on Amazon. I think it was on Amazon, and the 3-star review basically said that even though this product didn't work for me at all, it worked for my friend, it worked for like all this. However, their medical team worked with me for 6 months and did everything and ended up finding me another product that worked for me. And so even though feminescence doesn't work for me, so that was the thing for us.
Yeah.
One of the things that we did is we introduced a medical team because, so what we're saying, every single person is different, and what dose you need and what other support that you need, whether you need a probiotic or more water or whatever the issue is. And so having medical professionals that you can talk to give you support and guidance, makes a very, very big difference.
How many calls would you guys say you get to your medical team? Like, did you get a lot of people?
Oh yeah. We get thousands a year.
Really?
So, yeah, I wouldn't know off the top of my head, but yeah, we have 3 doctors. We have 2 doctors and a pharmacist, clinical nutritionist on our core team for medical responses every week. And then we obviously have other practitioners who that if those 3 can't deal with them and it's a more complicated sort of discussion that they can talk to. But yeah, we get thousands a year.
In closing, because we could talk about supplements for hours, anything that you would like to convey to those watching, how to get, let's say they have a bag of supplements, they want to condense them, or they think they've got some issues like menopause or whatever, and they don't know where to start. What's some good guidance on just knowing a little bit more about supplements and how to start and how to do it in a wise way.
Shawn, before we get into
Sure.
those bullet points of
Right.
giving people tips, I just want to make one point about packaging,
Oh, okay.
right? Because there is the supplement, whether it's the tablet, the capsule, the powder, and then there's the packaging.
Right.
And where we see that, especially, is even in teas, where we start to see microplastics from the packaging. We see issues with stability of products like vitamins if they're packaged poorly, disintegration time over time, right? So my husband does this all the time. So we have a vitamin C and, he leaves the cap a little bit loose. And I'm like, Mark, you can't do that. The oxygen degrades the vitamin C.
Mine are all at the bottom of my backpack because the lid comes off, and then I just take them out of my backpack.
But the fact is, like, we degrade some of these nutrients within heat, light, and oxygen. So you open up a bag, and I know that James and the team has actually tested this. You open up a bag of something, some powder. By the time you're in the middle or in the end of the bag, you don't quite have what you had at the top of the bag. And I would say the same about tablets, the top. So for the average person out there, consider the packaging along with the product. That is the product, the whole thing. And one of the things that I really like that Symphony has done over the years is really taken that into account by having these blister packs. So every
I've heard
capsule.
all about the blister packs. That was one dinner with James learning all about
the blister packs.
Yeah.
Well, there's a rhyme and a reason for it, right? To really keep everything sealed in, because you don't want disintegration over time. So then you just have less efficacy, even for a product that's considered to be efficacious. So I want everybody to consider that point about exploring the packaging and note expiration dates. Some people get a little bit sloppy about that. So let's go into the tips then. Practical tips.
I think that testing obviously is you in this day and age. You can get testing for everything. You can get it for your hormones. You can get it for heavy metals, vitamin and mineral deficiencies. I think some of that testing to find out where you're at is really important. I remember talking to somebody who was involved in the omega-3 world, talking about how the biggest failing that they have in clinical trials around omega-3s is that they don't do a preliminary test to find out what is the deficiency that person has in omega-3s. And that if they did that in the beginning and gave them the right dose that person needs to get up to a healthy level, the success rates would just be through the roof. And I think that that's the same for many vitamins and minerals, is like, one, finding out what you don't need, but finding out how much you need of something to get you to a healthy level. I think that testing is a real key factor. I think one of the other factors is do you actually feel something? And when you start that product, do you actually feel something? The amount of times that we get, particularly with men and revolution, that's probably the biggest one, where within a matter of weeks, their libido and energy and all of these things have been impacted. And they sort of, oh, wow, I actually feel this. And you sort of go, well, why are you taking something if you don't feel it? Now, in saying that, sometimes the benefit is so incremental that you don't actually realize how much you're benefiting from it until you stop taking it. Like, that's the biggest issue I have with my father, is keeping him on things, because he'll start to feel better and he'll, I don't need to take this anymore. Yeah. And lo and behold, 2 months later or 3 months later, some of his issues will come back and he'll go, oh, these things come back again. And I go, well, you stopped taking everything. Oh, no, I think it's just come back. It's sort of like I caught a vitamin or mineral deficiency. Like, so I think that those two are two factors. And then, just one final point in relation to vetting. There are third-party consumer organizations that do test and vet products. There's a group called Consumer Lab, consumerlab.com, and those guys will test products. With us, for example, they test our melatonin to make sure what are the levels of melatonin that you have in a product. Does it match labels? They do things like that. And then finding industry organizations. Interestingly enough, in Austin, there's actually a group called the American Botanical Council. And when you look at industry associations, you've got to be careful, because you've got to look at what are their interests. So there's a lot of industry organizations, their interest is to protect the industry. It's not necessarily to protect the consumer. what's really interesting about the American Botanical Council is they actually have education and programs on adulteration. And their focus has been having a healthy, clean herbal industry so that there's products and processes that companies can go through to ensure that they are providing the highest quality, because their belief system at ABC, or the American Botanical Council, is that when we have the best players in our industry doing the right things, people trust herbs, they use more herbs, and they can, and that is healthy for our industry. Protecting bad players that have a lot of money is not in their interest. And so that's looking for organizations, and they're hard to find. You have to have insider information sometimes to know how they vet things. But, American Botanical Council is a really great organization that does a lot of programs to protect and vet and look after consumer interests.
Yeah. Anything you want to add?
I would echo what James is saying about personalization, quite honestly. Test, don't guess. And I say that from the standpoint of, you don't know what you don't know. And some people, I was involved in a clinical trial in which these were quote unquote healthy people, healthy middle-aged adults. For the most part, like 80% of them were taking omega-3 fatty acids. They still came in at like 5 to 6% of their omega-3 index. And it really needs to be at 8. And it's quite a jump, right? And so they were supplementing. These are healthy people. So don't assume that you have adequate amounts of nutrients, that there isn't a gap. And then on the other side of that, maybe certain things could be toxic. When you talked about your patient with vitamin D, there's nuance to vitamin D. Do you have a gene variant in vitamin D receptors where you might actually functionally need a little bit more vitamin D, or other ways to test vitamin D? So personalization to me is everything. Gift yourself on your birth date or once a year with tests, like do a battery of tests, and actually proactively ask your physician, can I get my zinc measured, my magnesium? When I go in, I also get mercury, I get lead, and you pay a little bit more, but in the end, you may be paying less because you're not having to take all these supplements that aren't really serving and may even be excessive.
So just to add to that, it just made me remember genetics.
Yeah.
So when you talk about methylation is a big phrase at the moment in the health world. And if you aren't methylating, if you've got a gene variant or an issue with that, so finding out if you have any of those issues. So that's the thing, I'm deficient in this particular vitamin or mineral, but I don't understand. I'm taking it all of the time. And then you find out that you have an issue genetically, and that if you take different cofactors or if you do something different, all of a sudden you're going to absorb it. And that's in my very lay term explanation of that.
Well, 2 out of 3 people have a methylation insufficiency, so that is a big one.
And so that's one of those tests that you can do once in your life to really find out, where am I at from a genetic perspective. And that goes then to, it's one of the things that some of our team who are involved in epigenetics and preconception health are huge proponents of, because they know that not only are you going to potentially improve your own vitamins and mineral and own health, but there's stuff that you can do from a preconception perspective, so that if there's these issues in your genes, that if you do certain preconception health, you can stop those genes from being expressed in your children. And that's something that I think is like that's an area of health that we're learning and hearing more and more about, is, genetics and epigenetic expression, and how doing preconception health can stop certain genes from being expressed, which is amazing. I mean, it's just amazing that you can get your genes and go, oh, wait, both of us have this issue. If we do this, we can potentially stop our children from having those issues. And so, I mean, it's huge. I mean,
and you only have to test your genes once.
Right.
They don't change. So it's pretty easy.
Well, I mean, like I said, we could talk about this kind of stuff, and then you bring in epigenetics and pharmacogenetics, and that's another few hours. Supplements are confusing, but they are helpful. They can also be harmful. And that's why it's important to work with somebody that knows what they're doing, and working with supplements that in my opinion, I'm a purist. I like single ingredient supplements that are well vetted and well made. I want to thank you both for coming on today and educating us on supplements.
Well, I want to thank you because, one of the things that you do is that you also don't focus on brands.
Yeah.
And I think that's important. For you, it's like, which product?
Yeah.
What product have I used that works?
Mm.
Because like I said, that herbal company I mentioned before, I'm criticizing them for being involved in mushrooms, but the work they do with herbs is exceptional.
Right.
Because that's what they specialize in. And, that's one of the things that you do is you look at each individual product and look at and work with your patients with that so that you can give an educated, honest opinion about how this particular individual product works and whether you think it's a good one or not. And so I think that the fact that you also don't have your own line of Dr. Tassone supplements, it's sort of, no, I cherry pick what I have tested and used with my patients and vetted to see, that's more doctors need to do that, because at the moment there's a lot of doctors who are just sort of like, buy this product from me.
The world doesn't need a bottle with my face on it. I can tell you that right now. So, and if it did, it'd be a bottle of wine probably. So, well, thank you both again. And thanks for coming all the way to Austin. We've got the lovely Capitol in the background. And be informed, be educated, and be your own advocate. Thank you.
Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed this episode and you'd like to help support the podcast, please share it with others, post about it on social media, or leave a rating and review. To catch all the latest from me, you can follow me on Instagram at Shawn Tassone MD, or on Twitter at Tassone Doc, and on Facebook at America's Holistic Gynecologist. If you're really interested in your hormones and you want to do a deep dive, get my book, The Hormone Balance Bible, on Amazon or other major retailers. Thanks, and I'll see you next time. This podcast and website represent the opinions of Dr. Shawn Tassone and his guests. The content here should not be taken as medical advice. It's for informational purposes only, and because each person is so unique, please consult your healthcare professional for any medical questions.